Yeah, we tend to root for the Marvel superheroes because, you know, they're the good guys and everything, but I would say you could make the case that a lot of Marvel villains were actually right. Yeah, that's right, I said it. Today I'll be looking at a lot of the best and worst Marvel villains we've seen so far in the MCU and make the case that some of them might have had a good point or two. You know, if you ignore a lot of the mass mayhem and destruction. Was Thanos right? Was Gore? Was Ultron? Let's find out right now. Alright, I'm gonna start this off with one of the more recent MCU villains, and that's Gore. Boy, was he right or what? And before I really start to dive into this and get into the nitty-gritty of which villains were right, I feel like I should clarify something. Look, I know that these villains here are bad guys. I'm not rooting for them to cause massive amounts of destruction or go through with their sick plans. But I'm just trying to make the point that their ideas might have been on the right track from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
Okay, so let's talk about Gore. Really, Gore is the whole reason I wanted to make this list. I could just rant about Gore this whole time, but I have to spread the love a little bit. I'll just say though that Gore was the first MCU villain in a while that presented an idea of why he was evil or whatever, and then never even attempted to try to disprove it. Gore thinks that all gods must die, that they're actually incredibly selfish, arrogant, out of touch, and would rather sit around and do nothing rather than be involved with the people worshipping them. And guess what? He was absolutely right. When we go to Omnipotent City and meet Zeus and all these other gods, Gore is proven right. They don't care that their own are getting butchered and would rather find a time for the yearly orgy. Then the third act and climax of the movie shifts focus to really lock in on the love theme of the movie, and I would argue more or less ignores the whole gods are really bad and the system needs to change plot that was established throughout the movie. Now, this movie has its fans and its detractors. I am unfortunately a detractor, as I think it's a step down from Ragnarok, and I think what could have helped this movie for me was some type of acknowledgement that Gore was right and the gods were an issue that needed to be dealt with. Like, Thor gave up his kingship in Endgame to find his new purpose in life. On top of the idea of opening his heart to other people after so much loss, wouldn't it have been awesome to see him learn about why Gore hated gods, saw how horrible they were, and try to change the whole system going forward? That would have been a great continuation of his character arc from Ragnarok and Endgame. Anyways, I digress. Gore was right, the gods were awful, and they need to evaluate how they use their power across the galaxy. Okay, when making a list of all Marvel villains who are actually right, it's hard to ignore Thanos. I mean, there's a reason why people are spraying graffiti everywhere in New York saying hashtag Thanos was right. You don't see hashtag Malekith was right or hashtag Ego the Living Planet was right in a fancy New York bathroom, do you? I didn't think so. And the fact that there was some truth to what Thanos was saying is what made him such a fascinating and interesting villain in Infinity War. Because yeah, the whole wiping out half the galaxy thing is pretty bad, and throwing your beloved daughter off a cliff is definitely frowned upon. But his motivations seem like he actually wanted to save the universe and thought he was the only one capable of doing it. In Infinity War, Thanos is presented by a figure burdened with glorious purpose. Only he is strong enough to do what must be done and set out on a quest to save the universe to stop what happened on his own planet from happening elsewhere. See, if you just speak in broad strokes, he seems like the hero of the story. He witnessed a personal tragedy that wiped out all his people and wants to make sure it never will happen again. But of course, it's his method that is the big problem. Man, what would the MCU look like if Thanos didn't want to wipe out half the universe, but instead wanted to double its resources so life would sustain indefinitely? Then would we really root against him? Or would we see his sacrifice on Vormir as even more tragic than it already was? It's tough to say. But again, I ask the question, was Thanos actually right? I mean, have you been stuck in rush hour traffic lately or in some really long line somewhere? I bet then you're sort of thinking, well, Thanos' plan may have made a little sense here. And yes, you'd probably be worried about disappearing for 5 years, but if I'm in the MCU, I can just do what mostly everyone has done in Phase 4 and just pretend like the snap never happened. I'm just saying, you're telling me all of Kamala's family and friends stuck around and don't talk about it? But I digress. After Chadwick Boseman's tragic passing, there was a big question about what to do with the Black Panther character, and one of the largest calls from fans was to resurrect Killmonger and let him be the new Black Panther. And while narratively that sounds a little messy, that's so appealing to so many because of the love we all have for Killmonger's character. Michael B. Jordan will definitely always be in the conversation whenever people are ranking the top 5 MCU villains, and for good reason. Killmonger was a force to be reckoned with, but also was a character who wasn't wrong about his principles and ideals. He felt that Wakanda, in all its technological glory and advancement, was making the wrong choice to stay hidden when so many black individuals were being persecuted and oppressed all around the world. See, that part? It's excellent, and you can't really find any flaw in his logic or reasoning. It's his method of fixing the problem, though, that causes issues. He is a radical antagonist, trying to make it so advanced weapons are delivered all around the world so that black individuals can rise up and revolt in the most aggressive way possible. And while he couldn't succeed in the MCU, his ideologies opened T'Challa's eyes to what Wakanda was doing incorrectly and inspired him to be better. That's the sign of a great villain right there. Truly great superhero movies have their antagonist be right, but flawed so in a way that the protagonist can learn from them something and be better. It's why a movie like Black Panther works so incredibly well from a character perspective, while something like Thor: Love and Thunder fails to do that, because it didn't have Thor necessarily learn anything from Gore's mission. Anyways, Killmonger is awesome, and I'm very curious how the sequel film continues expanding on the idea that Killmonger opened up during the first film. Baron Zemo has been on an interesting path so far in the MCU. He was the main bad guy in Captain America: Civil War, but that movie has so much stuff going on between Captain America and Iron Man that Baron Zemo gets lost a little bit. He is a secondary concern, and he's this super serious ex-mercenary that's so dedicated to his goal after losing his family. Then, in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, he morphs into more of his comic book alter ego with his wealth, his connections, and his signature purple mask. And while I like seeing Zemo in this slightly goofier mode, and when I say goofier, I'm really hoping my saintly editor Ben is using the Zemo dancing clip. Anyways, while I like Zemo in this goofier mode, his core values seem to remain the same. He wants to take power away from the powerful people who are hurting the less powerful people. On paper, that sounds a little noble, right? He's experienced unimaginable loss thanks to what happened in Sokovia, and before people can say the Avengers actually saved the world here, well, Tony Stark made Ultron to cause this in the first place, so really they were just cleaning up their own mess. Zemo wanted to break up the Avengers so that these super powerful, unchecked heroes weren't just running around doing whatever they wanted without any sort of oversight or accountability. I'm just saying, he makes a good point. In the end, Vulture may have been a thief, but it's not like he was evil. Sure, he disintegrated the first Shocker and didn't really care, and threatened a 15-year-old's family, which by estimates is... let me check on here. Oh yeah, that's bad. But he also didn't want to destroy the world or plunge it into darkness or anything. He was just a man who was tired of being crushed by large corporations who wanted to provide for his family. And like a lot of the problems in the MCU, it all traces back to Iron Man. You see, Tony Stark clearly wanted to do good in terms of helping repair New York after the first Avengers movie, but Tony obviously didn't think about how that would affect the little guy. Damage control came through and shut Toomes down, forcing him out of work, which most of him and his men couldn't afford. That was a boneheaded thing to do, and Toomes just did what he did best and made the most out of the situation. And Vulture was this incredibly compelling villain in Homecoming, and now I can't wait to see how the Sonyverse handles him. You know, because they randomly put him in a different universe, made him basically not care about his family at all, and decided to team up with Morbius for a series of misadventures. So that all may sound bad, but the Toomes we saw in Homecoming is an excellent villain. Yes, Kaecilius has his issues. He fell under Dormammu's influence and set out to unleash the world-ending deity from the Dark Dimension, and I'm not saying that part was right. But he also didn't exactly know this. He thought unleashing Dormammu from the Dark Dimension would bring eternal life and peace on Earth. Yeah, Kaecilius, anyone from a place called the Dark Dimension isn't gonna do that. Anyways, that aspect of wanting eternal life is better explained in the prequel comic for the movie, where it's revealed Kaecilius had lost both his wife and his son. So he ultimately wanted to be reunited with his loved ones and didn't want anyone to ever feel that way he did again. That's kinda nice, right? But what really drove Kaecilius to the dark side was him being told the Dark Dimension was not to be trifled with under any circumstances, but then he found out that the Ancient One actually was siphoning her energy from the Dark Dimension to help extend her life. To be told no to using Dark Dimension energy because it was dangerous, but then seeing your master use it willy-nilly has got to sting a bit.
Hypocrite!
But the core aspect of Kaecilius' character is that he wanted to expose the hypocrisy of the Ancient One, and in that regard, he was actually right. There are times when villains just want to prevent unchecked power from running amok and they lose their humanity themselves. I was debating whether or not to include Sharon Carter on this list. It was tough because I don't think any aspect of her plan was right, but also I think her decision to turn bad was probably the best choice. So as it turns out, she was burned just as badly for helping Captain America in Civil War, but just because she's not a main character who could fight Thanos and have a bright, colorful costume, the government didn't forgive her that quickly. And Steve, I guess, didn't want to invite her to be on his rogue nomad team. Feeling betrayed by her government, she became the power broker. Although I don't like what they're doing with her character, I think she was right to turn evil and become a rich international threat rather than working on a government salary. At the end of the day, what did Ghost really want? Well, she wanted to not be used as a weapon and for her body to function normally and not painfully phase her out of existence. Now, can we really fault someone like that? Ghost has one of the most low-key tragic backstories for a villain in the MCU, and while she still made the classic bad guy mistake of resorting to crime without asking the good guys first, because like all of these stories, the chances are high that the good guys would help you anyway. And she was technically right. She was after Janet's energy to help cure her molecular destabilization, and Janet was able to help her a bit without ending her life. But even still, Ghost was right. Man, we have to really hope Ghost was one of the ones who were snapped away for 5 years, right? Because if she wasn't, then logically she wouldn't be here anymore, right? See, I think it's only because we are humans that we think Ultron is a bad guy. He was originally programmed to protect the planet from threats, and after coming online, he immediately surmises that humans are probably the biggest threat to the planet and need to be wiped out. And hey, I get it. I may just be a floating CBR voice, but I'm human too. I don't want to be wiped out or crushed by a meteor or whatever. How else would I watch CBR videos? But from an outside perspective, is Ultron that wrong? Aren't humans the biggest threat to the planet? We're using all the resources, we're facing overpopulation, we tear down and destroy things to make space for us, you know, all that stuff. And I know we do good things as well, but you kinda have to think that if Ultron's priority was to protect the planet, then he was right in who he should have gone after. And my favorite thing has always been that Ultron came to this conclusion that humanity was the worst after spending about 4 seconds on the internet. Yeah, that tracks. Early on, the MCU was accused of having a bit of a villain problem. Yeah, they were fine and provided good punching bags for our heroes, but most of the time they were there only to serve a very specific story purpose and not have a lot of nuance or depth. Obadiah Stane was greedy and evil. Red Skull was red and evil. You know, stuff like that. The one exception people like to point to is Loki. And man, how great must it be to be Tom Hiddleston? He was able to craft a character so compelling and charming that eventually, even though he died by the hands of Thanos, he still got his own spin-off Disney Plus show after that. So although Loki has been around for quite a while, I want to highlight how he was sort of right in that first movie, at least at the beginning. The whole thing that kicks the story off is Loki letting the Frost Giants into Asgard so that he can provoke Thor into being reckless and proving to Odin that Thor wasn't fit to be king. And yeah, he was right about that. Thor was clearly not ready to be king at that moment in time and needed to be humbled. So ultimately, Loki's plan to correctly prove Thor wasn't fit for the throne just led Thor to becoming fit for the throne, so that was a bit of a backfire. We're getting to the bottom of this list, and I wanted to take an entry and mention Agatha Harkness. She's an odd inclusion on this list because her plan didn't really consist of anything to be right or wrong about, as she really just wanted Wanda's powers for her own, but I would argue that she was right to do this after seeing the events of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. If Agatha had been successful in stealing Wanda's powers, then Scarlet Witch would have never been born and wouldn't have gone on a head-popping rampage on Earth 838. That universe's Franklin Richards would probably still have a father is what I'm saying. Also, Agatha was right to try to stop Wanda and steal her powers because Wanda was enslaving an entire town. So although it was sort of for selfish reasons, Agatha was on the right track. Magneto's methods are usually more extreme compared to Professor X, but both of them are right in what they are fighting for. Magneto doesn't want mutants to be persecuted, hunted, enslaved, or thought of as being less because of their abilities. And in that aspect, he's right. And it's only the fact that Magneto has often jumped over to the mutants are superior and humans should be the inferior ones type of mindset that puts him at odds with the world around him. So overall, his actions are extreme, but what he's fighting for, which is mutant rights, is something that's incredibly important and has always made him a fantastic villain.